So as a second stage of studying the ideas of aerobic endurance training, we're going to move on from continuous. So actually, when I say move on, we're going to look at an alternative continuous method, which we refer to as Fartlek training. Fartlek or Fartlek training. Okay, and this concept of fartlek, first of all, just understand that the word fartlek means speed play, and this kind of methodology was really designed around games players and the changes of intensity and the different types of running and challenges that performers might use in different game scenarios. But let me put that in there. It's a concept of speed play. But realize it is a continuous form of training because there's no breaks. Okay, so it's not interval, there are no rests. I'll dress for you a second what you might have instead of that. So there's no rest within this. And really what we're talking about within this format of training, we're talking about changes. So it's no longer steady state, steady pace running that we talked about with continuous, but we have changes of, and there's a few things that we can change. The first one is intensity of running. Now think about how we would measure intensity. We might go from 70% of heart rate maximum up to 90% of heart rate maximum, for example. We might go from a jog to a sprint. It might be another way of saying exactly the same thing. We also have changes in incline, and we can see that here. Look, this performer at some point is running uphill because they're on this kind of whatever it is, like canyon side or valley side here. You see here, this person is sort of apparently kind of run up and over a sand dune, and that leads me to my last point, which is we also have changes in terrain. So think about things like running cross country, for example. Think about mountain biking instead of road cycling, for example. We change the terrain on which we are actually training. Now, of course, in the sand example, if we go and run on the beach, the sand offers is a much softer structure than some like concrete or tarmac or the track, and therefore, of course, when we push our force down into the sand, we don't get as much force pushed back onto us, and therefore we have to work harder. So fartlek training allows us to benefit from those things. We really like to say in this format that it's really, really good for games players. Okay, so fartlek will be used a great deal by games players, but I also like to include the examples of combat sports as well, because I think they are also really relevant here. And the other thing, I mean, if we say, for example, that this methodology, it matches the environment in which people play their sport. So, you know, if you're a footballer, for example, very rarely are you going to run 20 minutes in a straight line like you would in continuous training, for example. But you may well have a high intensity sprint, jog back into position, another sprint, then a box to box moment where you're at quite high intensity and so on. So fartlek training kind of models that environment much, much better. I do want to say though, is that ultimately this is a continuous method. I said before that there's no breaks in the training, no rests. What we do have is periods of lower intensity work, okay? Lower intensity work. So on that basis, it is continuous, but it is not continuous training as itself. Okay, a couple of advantages and disadvantages. Let's do advantages up here. Don't know what I'm trying to write there. Advantages is very varied, okay? So we like the fact that it's very varied, it's almost relentlessly changeable, you can do almost anything you want, and we think it's really good for games type players. Okay, so that's a nice summary of what we've got, but there are some kind of negatives. We've also got to have availability of hills, for example, or beaches. How is that? Is that availability. Availability of hills, of sand, of those different things. If we're living in the east of England or in Holland, then maybe we're not getting so much availability of these things. And we've also got to think about that terrain, availability of terrain. Not all of us have a mountain to go and train on. So look, it's a pretty solid training methodology. It's used very, very widely. It's something that you can get up and do pretty quickly. I meant to add actually that we do also consider the use of harnesses and parachutes, this kind of thing, as can be included in the form of fartlek training. I mean, we can also argue that this is also a form of resistance as well, but ultimately this kind of harness uses, pulleys, parachutes, they're considered part of fartlek as well, and they increase the resistance. It's kind of like running uphill but on the flat, right? I suppose if you don't have the availability of hills but you do have the availability of a parachute harness, I mean, who has one of them? But you get the idea. If that happens to be the case at the club you go to, you can do it that way. Cheers.